So it was nice seeing you in Atlanta and talking to you right now. And hopefully one of these days we can get together in person interview.
I can't wait for that time.
Yeah. So I saw the video on Ofra interviewing Jennifer Hudson and mentioning your name, slow motion, slow cap. How was that feeling and watching that?
I mean, it was extraordinary, you know. It was extremely overwhelming, to like take a whole section to literally talk about my work and even go and mention my name. It was very encouraging. I also love that, that they took the time to actually acknowledge that, because most of the time, we're invisible. Most of the time nobody mentions our names. Like for some reason, I think people just think that things like that just happen, and it was also great because it gave me an opportunity to amplify that, and also amplify that, I didn't do this alone. Like, this happened with, the help of hundreds of people working on, thousands and thousands of like costumes.
And she mentioned that you did 82 costumes, and she was able to wear 50 costumes. So
yeah, no, we had 82 costumes ready because the script had been, required 82 looks, and then the script got rewritten. So we ended up shooting about, I think, a little bit over 50. I think maybe 52, 53. But we went through weeks and weeks of fittings, and she fit, like, we fit so many costumes on her, both vintage and couture, like, made to order clothing. 75 to 80% of her clothes were built for her, and so we required a lot of time.
How many was your staff? How many seamstresses, and how was the group? How many group?
It was a lot. It was a lot of people. So, like, we had we had 3 shops in New York, that I work with. So, and those, they employ hundreds of people, those shops. And then we had a tailor, a suit tailor, and he employs dozens of folks too. And then we had a shirt maker who was making the shirts, for the men, and he employs, maybe a dozen people. And so those are just the makers, right? Were the makers in New York, and we had a couple of like manufacturers in Los Angeles doing stuff. And then we had also a shop in Atlanta, that had a staff of 8, just banging stuff out. But then, I had maybe, I had like 4 assistants, we had 2 assistants in Los Angeles organizing all of the vintage stuff, all of the rentals, because if you've seen the film, you can see that, we had to fill stadiums and churches with period clothing. And so there were thousands of people that we had to. So I would say, I think the folks who worked on the costumes, would be like over, I would even venture to say close to 200 people,
Wow. So how was it working with Jennifer Hudson? What was the first image that came to your mind when you got this gig? When you were assigned this gig?
Yeah, I think, I've been a huge fan, right? And I think for me, I saw that her work on Dreamgirls, and I said, oh God, like, she's not only is she an amazing singer, but she can act, right? And she has an Oscar for it, right? And so for me, I really just wanted to sort of, with her, work towards this version of Aretha, because we didn't want to make her, like, pad her up and do prosthetics on her to make her look like Aretha. Although she does resemble Aretha, it's her version of Aretha, right? And so I think that was, one of my biggest one of the things that I was most excited about. But working with Jennifer it was a dream, you know, like we got along very well from the first day. You know, I think she was kind of like looking, like, you know, like listening a lot, you know, in the first few meetings that we've had. And then when we started fitting, we, you know, as I said, we went through weeks and weeks of fittings, you know, like I was trying to explain to her, this is what you're wearing in this concert, and this is what you're going to be wearing when you're like really sad and lonely, and this is what you're going to be wearing when your father slaps you, and this is what you're going to be wearing when, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so she saw that not only was I taking care of the pretty things, you know, the beautiful glamorous stuff, I was also really deeply invested in the storytelling, you know, that I think we together really made sure that we were telling a story. So there were moments that, you know, Aretha was down and out in her life. There were a lot of moments when she was struggling, and we wanted to make sure that the costumes also helped the work that Jennifer was going to do. So it was a dream. I couldn't even ask for a more collaborative actor, particularly because we were like, you know, we saw each other every day for months and months on end, and it was just great. Professional, never late. Not a single time was she late. Not a single time did she say, I'm tired, or I stop. You know, it was always like, you know, what's next? What's next? What's next? And honest, you know, and warm. I can't say, you know, I can't say. It was unbelievable. It was one of those, you know, I can't say enough about how awesome she was.
And seeing that billboard on Sunset Magazine, I mean Sunset Boulevard, you know, with your creation and Jennifer, talk about that. What was the feeling for you?
Again, I felt really overwhelmed, you know. I mean, here's the thing that I designed, you know, and a lot of people worked on, you know, that gown, we call that the Amsterdam gown. A lot of people like, you know, that's all hand beaded. So like it passed through many hands, right? So there's a lot of love in that particular gown. It's also a very heavy gown, you know, it's like 50 pounds because of all the beads and the stones and all that kind of stuff. But Eric, who I work with, who made that gown, said, you know, we really have to pay attention to the details. And I said, yes, absolutely, because we never know, you know, if they'll do a close-up of the dress or whatever. And lo and behold, it's like this giant like image. And we were like, thank goodness we paid attention. You know, we made sure that every single bead is in place, because look at it, it's like, it's enormous, but it was overwhelming. It was like overwhelming. You know, I couldn't even imagine, you know, I never even had the sort of like brain space to imagine that something that I would make would actually be that big, but also in a major city, you know, in Los Angeles, where thousands of people are like driving by it every day. Forget about it. It's like amazing.
So do you have a favorite costume among all the 82 costumes that you did? And
yeah,
yes.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of like favorites. I think that one, the Amsterdam dress, is one of my favorites, you know, because it's the most photographed one, but it was also like, there's a lot of love that went to it, you know. The gown that she wears in Madison Square Garden, because it's such an homage to what she did wear in Madison Square Garden, you know. That birthday party gown, the gold gown where she wears the Norwegian fox coat, is also very, very special. It's very special because that's my mother's fur coat. And you know, I also loved, you know, the sort of very simple things that we did on her, that slip, you know, when she's, you know, when she's down and out, she sees her mother, the spirit of her mother, you know. I love that. I found that vintage slip in a small like antique store in Atlanta, and I said, oh God, this is it, you know, like we found it, you know what I mean? Because it made her feel very vulnerable. It had a lot of history to it. Yeah, so those are my favorite things, but it's like, you know, I can't really pick from the 82, you know, it's like Sophie's choice.
And how did your costumes end up in the Grammy Museum?
Well, the Grammy Museum was doing an exhibit, you know, and we know how many Grammys, you know, Arita was a multi-Grammy winning artist, you know. First, you know, she's also the first female who like made it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But the Grammy Museum called and said, hey, we wanna feature the the clothes, and particularly on Aretha. And so, the studio asked if, we'd put a lot of the clothes, the made to order gowns in archive. And so we pulled it out, and they wanted to see it. It was kind of it was overwhelming to see it, particularly because, like, my clothes are there. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. You could probably be the first Filipino designer, costume designer, to be featured in that museum. I think so. I'm gonna do my research.
Is that true? Is that true?
Yeah.
Because then that's an honor,
It is.
I hope I'm not the last.
No, of course not. Will. And then, what is your relationship to Aretha Franklin? I mean, are you aware of her songs?
Oh yeah, I mean, my mother is contemporary of Aretha, and so, like, I remember, in the Philippines, like, she would play the records. We would, she and my dad would dance to it. My dad passed away, but she and my dad would listen to it, and dance to it, So, like, I knew who Aretha Franklin was, I just never imagined that I would work on a biopic, or, of her life. So, but I think part of what this movie has given me was the gift of, like, learning more about her life, and so it was such a pleasure and an honor to really, I feel like I got to really know her, this person who I only knew through her voice, through my mother playing her records on Sundays.
Mhm. And you talk about your mom. What kind of influences did your mother do to you while growing up to become a costume designer?
Oh, I learned everything from my mother, right? Like, so I feel like my mother had such a great sense of style, and taste, and she was, she loved clothing, she loved jewelry, you would love her. But and she loved the arts, she was the one who introduced me to the theater, to paintings and all of that kind of stuff. And so she's probably my first and biggest influence, and so, because the movie is her period, she lived through those periods. I wanted to make sure that everything was right, because I'm actually really anxious for her to see the movie, because I don't want her to say, like, no, that doesn't look like it's from the 1950s or the 1960s and all. So I needed to get right, because I'll get a call. But she instilled in me a sense of style, and also she made me kind of be fascinated with this sense of transformation, particularly, women of her generation. Um, One of my favorite things was, as a kid, was to hang out in her dressing room and literally watch my mother get dressed and put makeup on. During that time, she would put the false eyelashes and, tease the hair and everything. And I just saw her, like, transform, and I was like, oh my God, how did you get from that to this? And that's, like, like, you're like, oh my God, look at you, like, look at what you did, and it got me hooked. I'm like, oh my God, women could literally transform themselves into like these, you know what I mean? And it made me excited about all the possibilities that could bring.
Wow. And growing up in Cebu, Philippines, how was the experience and what were the influences of the city to you?
Well, I think a lot of, it's where there's a lot of cosmopolitan women in Cebu, right? Like, you have like Amparito Lulier, and, the Osmenias, and all of, Michelle, Monique Lulier, is a contemporary of my sister, so I think Cebuana women actually have a lot of style, Pilita, Corrales, and, all of that. And so I've always kind of noticed that, right? Like, at church, and, everybody, I mean, in the Philippines, people get dressed to go to church, so I think that sort of, like, really influenced me. So for me, kind of like that early formative years growing up in Cebu, going to Catholic church, Catholic school, and then church, all of that, like, influenced the way I saw clothing, right? And that was a time when, there were a lot of like parties and soirees, and I remember my dad and my mom would, like, when we were growing up, would get dressed for parties, and I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. It's especially because when I look back at it, I'm like, just like how beautiful Filipinos were, particularly Cebuanos and Cebuanas. They were just so, there was a sense of grace about it, and that I think there's also a relaxed kind of way, because you know there's no pressure to be the capital. We're the second city, but it's also the oldest city, because the Spanish landed there. There's a sense that the style is innate, you know what I mean? And I remember all of these women, my mom's contemporaries, there were all of these like couturiers in Cebu that that they all went to, and they're still around. Like when I go home, like Philip Rodriguez actually is still around, and he's like the granddaddy of all Cebuano designers. And so it's like it's great. I'm very proud to be Cebuano, as you can tell.
When was the last time you were back home?
I was back home the Christmas before. No, oh my gosh, it's been actually over 2 years now. So I was very sad that the pandemic happened, because I had not been home. I've missed 2 Christmases already, and I want to go home so badly. It's hard right now with COVID. My mom is finally vaccinated, and so I'm excited about it.
Oh, what are the first things you do when you go back home?
I would go straight to my mother and hug her.
Oh.
I miss her so much. I miss her so much. And the pandemic was hard for her. My mother is a very social person, and to be told to lock herself in the house, was hard for her.
And how did you take care of yourself during the pandemic and lockdown? How did you take care of your physical and mental health?
I don't know about the physical, because I gained a lot of weight. But that's what I did. I ate my feelings. I literally just became focused on my family, and focused on my activism, and focused on my teaching, because nobody was working. We weren't working. We had just wrapped Respect, and then 2 weeks later, the shutdown happened, and so and I just like focused on taking care of all of those things, preparing for, you know, for work to come back, and what we want in terms of how we want to move forward as an industry.
Mhm. And I read that you were also the designer in Lingua Franca, and I just interviewed Isabel Sandoval.
Oh,
So
okay.
how was that
She's Cebuana
working with
too.
her? Uh-huh. So
Yeah,
how was
she's
that working with Isabel?
unbelievable. Like we spoke, because we do speak a common language. It was. I think that film is so special. There's something really honest and beautiful. Like you kind of want to take care of that film. I love Isabel, a gentle yet firm leader. And she is unflappable. She knows what she wants, but you never see her sweat for it. And she was also very clear about the vision. I love how proud she is of who she is and where she's come from. Um, yeah, no, she's a special person. We all should be very proud that she's Filipino.
Being Filipino, Asian, and a person of color, how do you feel breaking into Hollywood? And do you think Hollywood is ready for Filipinos and Asian to
Yeah.
break into Hollywood and get in?
I think Hollywood is getting ready. I was with people like John Chu, who I had a great conversation with. And all of these Chloe Zhao and and Isabel, and all of these people of color who are really being loud and assertive about claiming space and making space not only for all of us, but making sure that that we get to work on different things, not only in our stories but other stories. Is really important. I also feel like Hollywood, just by the nature of the film industry, is going at a faster rate than theater, because it is able to, it is able to actually employ more people. So that gives me some sort of hope, but I also feel like the fight and the struggle, we've only just started it, and so for me, until we get real like equity, I think the day that you stop asking those questions would be the day that I would think would be the day that I'd stop talking about it, right? Because like when we don't have to ask these questions, then it means that we're at a good place. But I know that there's people are doing their best and they're trying, right? But I think it's also important that we acknowledge that this is hard work, and it requires all of us to do it, and it requires a lot of grace for all of us, like a lot of forgiveness, because we are all going to make mistakes, right? It's not if we really want to change it, then we should be willing to take risks, and with risks comes mistakes and failures, and we have to embrace that.
And if you were given a chance to talk or advise your younger self, what would you say?
I would say, uh, to a younger me, don't waste your time thinking about if you are worth it, if you deserve it, if you belong. I spent so much time doubting myself. I spent so much time just making myself smaller, because I didn't feel like there was room for me, right? I would tell my younger self to claim the space, and hold my head up high, because I know that I am worth something.
That's nice. And my last question, what are you up to now in your future projects?
Oh my gosh, there's so many things that's happening, right? So I think, I'm continuing my advocacy work and, being an educator. That's really very important to me. But I'm in the middle of shooting a film right now that I can't really tell you what it is, but it's a very exciting project. There's also, a couple of Broadway shows that are coming to Broadway. One of them is The Outsiders, based on the S.E. Hinton book that Francis Ford Coppola made a movie out of. So that's being made into a musical. I'm designing the scenery for that. And we're having our pre-Broadway tryouts in Chicago in the spring. And then another musical, K-pop, is coming to Broadway. And so that's also previewing in the spring in DC. And I've also just taken on being a creative producer for New York City Center. And I'm working on a project with Billy Porter. I'm producing his revival of The Life. So I'm doing a lot of creative producing right now as well. And I'm excited about that.
Are you ready for the fame that goes with respect?
Am I ready for the fame? I don't think anyone is ever going to be ready for that. But I'm very excited for people to see all the hard work that hundreds of people worked on, particularly in the costumes. We had so many people worked on that show, and particularly people of color. And a lot of a lot of women work on it too, and so it's very exciting to see. I'm very, very excited for the world to see all of their work.
Well, thank you very much, Clint, for joining us, and we love seeing you, and hopefully we'll see you in person.
Thank you, Janet.
Oh, thank you very much.